So I will be moderating tonight. And so if you have any questions as we go along, please put those in the chat box and we'll make sure to get those at the end, or you can just wait until the end. And you can, we can ask those and you can unmute yourself and that type of thing at the end. For those of you that had your camera running, I did kind of turn that off. Sometimes that helps with our viewing by doing that. So tonight we will go ahead and get started, and our session tonight is on a living harvest centerpiece, and our speaker tonight is Sharon Flint. She is the horticulture agent in Scott County, and she's going to be showing us kind of demonstrating how to make one of those. And you can kind of see a picture there on the screen of what it's going to look like. So it looks really cool. I've never made one of these before, so I'm looking forward to learning how to all your tips, Sharon. So we will go ahead and get started. And like I said, if you've got questions as we go, just post those in the chat box and we'll cover those at the end.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Now, this is a great craft if you like to do those sorts of things for upcoming, like your Thanksgiving table, or just to have on your table. And it's something also that you can use later on. But tonight we're going to learn how to create a super simple. Now, you know, it's not super simple, I would have to say, but it is charming. It's a living centerpiece with succulents that can be enjoyed now as a centerpiece for your fall decorating, and then later as an easy care planting for your home or garden. Now we're going to be using succulents, and succulents are plants that store water in their tissues. Their leaves are usually thick. They're really turgid because they store water in their leaves. Many of these plants can survive for months without rainfall by utilizing this stored water. And succulents are very drought resistant, needing water infrequently after establishment in a pot or a garden. Cactus is in this family, but we're not going to be using cactus in our living centerpiece because they're not very user-friendly for this type of use. Now, succulents, the fun thing about this is that succulents come in a variety of natural colors, and they can be, and they even flower in bold and beautiful shades. But as you see here, this is a photo from Mountain Crest Gardens, a wholesaler where sometimes I have bought succulents for classes and stuff. They sell plugs sometimes that are really great for classes like these if you have an in-person class. But you can see these are the pastel shades, they say, but there is that middle dark one, but they just come in many, many different colors. They're very easy to propagate and often as easy as cutting from the mother plant and placing it in the soil. And as you can see here, this is the mother plant, leaves from the mother plant, and they are actually developing little babies out here on the end of the mother's leaves. Now, this is one that I have on my desk. Often the stems or rosettes will already have little rootlets growing on them, and this will help to give a jump start on creating a new plant. So this has had a center plant here, and then these are two offshoots from that center plant. And I've even noticed that I also have another new offshoot from these babies. So they will just continue to send out offshoots as long as they're doing well. Now, you can have tender or hardy succulents. Now, when I did this, I have done this particular class before. I did this in 2015, which was actually like 6 years ago. Didn't seem like it's been that long ago, but it has. And at that time, I did it with hardy plants with the catch of saying, you know, you can plant these outside when spring arrives. Now, the succulent that I'm building tonight that you see will have, they have some hardy plants in them, but they also have some tender plants in them because I just used what plants I had around the house. Some are from some of my own house plants and things like that. So, but if you plan carefully enough, you can have some that are an all tender type of centerpiece that will come from just house plants, or you can have hardy plants. Now, if they're cold hardy plants, it means they're, for us, it means they would be adapted to at least a zone 6, which means that they would be resistant to cold temperatures, say down to a -10 is about the lowest temperatures that they could withstand. That's about as cold as it will get here in our area of Kentucky, central Kentucky here. Tender plants would be killed by those freezing temperatures, but hardy plants are able to survive for the most part those temperatures, depending on how long the temperature is and also some microclimates. So look for hardy plants if you plan to plant your centerpiece outside after you finish with it. So getting started, what you will need. Now, as far as plant material, you'll want to look for a pumpkin or a gourd. Now, the pumpkins that I used, they were given to me. They were like at the end of the year type of thing. I got some, they're the Cinderella type pumpkins that are they look like they've been squashed. And I sort of like those for this type of thing because they have a lot of surface area on top where you can build a rather large, sometimes centerpiece on top of them. But you can also use gourds if you would like. You could use the tiny little pumpkins. Those are precious sometimes to use as little centerpieces, big or small. You do want one that will sit relatively flat on its bottom. You don't want it rocking and rolling around if you're going to try to use it as a centerpiece. You want to your centerpiece on top of it. You will need some succulent plants or cuttings, and you will need some sheet moss. Now, as far as tools, now this is where I've sort of adapted this from 2015, and later on in the program, I'll tell you why. But I'm going to use wet Florist Foam tonight, and that is the Florist Foam that you need to get wet. It's called wet foam. You can find that at places, I'm sure, like Walmart and those sorts of places that have, those types of craft items, and places like Michael's and that sort of thing carry this type of stuff. But you want to look for the wet foam. You also need like skewers or dowel rods, small dowel rods, or even florist wire or something like that. And later on, you'll see why, and that'll help you choose your product. You'll need a knife for cutting. You can use some rooting hormone, although succulents seem to root very easily. So, that's one thing you can either use or not. It depends on you. You might want some florist pins, which are sort of like little bobby pins. I'll show you a picture of it later that help to pin the moss onto the florist foam, or you can use some florist wire and have some wire cutters to cut it to make it small enough to pin it on there. You'll probably need some wire cutters and or some pruners, depending on the materials that you choose. You'll also want some brown paper or newspaper to lay down. That's going to be your work surface on top of your table or your countertop or wherever you happen to be working. Also, you want some handy wipes, like something with maybe a little bleach in it, or bleach and paper towels and that sort of thing, because you will be wiping off your pumpkin. So the first steps, what you're going to do is you're going to clean your pumpkin. You want to wipe your pumpkin or gourd down with a sanitizing wipe. We're trying to inhibit, just for a while, the decay and disease-causing fungi and bacteria that help to break down the surface of that pumpkin or gourd after, its season is over. You just need a little bit, like a 1 to 10 part of, say, bleach to water. You can put it in a spray bottle and spray your pumpkin down. Or, as I said, you can just get a sanitizing wipe with the pumpkins I actually use some sanitizing spray I had here, that we used for our hands, and just sort of spritzed it onto a wet cloth and then wiped them down really well. Also, to help you make cleanup easy, you want to cover your work surface with brown craft paper or newspaper. What I like to do is put several layers down so that as I go along, I can clean up as I go along. So, once I've made a mess or got it really wet or something like that, I can sort of fold up all that layer of paper and throw it away, and then start with a new clean surface with, like the next step I'm doing. Also, it might be nice to have a sink or at least a large bowl or something like nearby, because you will need to soak your Florist Foam before you use it. And also, there's not a picture of it here, but also your moss that you're going to be using. You will need to soak it as well for this type of centerpiece. Also, on your pumpkin, you want to make sure that you remove the stem there. On this one, it was sort of a hollowed out stem, so I just took my knife and sort of scraped it off of there, and it came off pretty easily. Now, this says cut your wet foam and fit it to the top of your pumpkin. This picture here is actually showing dry foam. And I wanted to save some of my foam. This foam I've had for years, and I've cut off bits and pieces of it here and there. So what I did actually was cut it in half while it was dry and sort of fitted it to my pumpkin, and cut it in half again, because what I actually did was sort of put 2 pieces on top of there to actually cover the top surface area. And then later I sort of fitted it a little more and cut it around. But you want to connect your foam to your pumpkin. You can either use some of that florist wire I was putting it down into the pumpkin, or what you see on the right there is actually a skewer, like a shish kebab. I had some of those in my little craft box, and they worked really well. They're very easy to cut. I had some pruners that were sort of like an all-purpose pruner that just got used for everything. So I was able to drive that little skewer down into the pumpkin very easily, a good ways, and then I cut it off so that you do not see the skewer sticking out of the foam, and it holds the foam onto the top of the pumpkin very well. Now, you should soak your sheet moss and get it really wet, squeeze it out until it's just like a sponge. And when I say just like a sponge, I mean you squeeze it out until all of the water goes out, but it'll still be damp, but you really can't get any more water out of it. And at that time, you want to start placing it on the top of your foam. Now, it doesn't show this in the picture, but I did go back and I used this moss sparingly to start off with, just sort of very thinly on here. This is pretty thick application here. I was just trying to show you, to put it on the top of that foam to get it covered. But this is not like you're trying to make an arrangement or anything, like a florist arrangement if you were using greenery or something like that. So just start very sparingly, spread it pretty thin, because that will help you when you're putting your cuttings in here later on. And then in the second picture over to your far right, you can see I've got my index finger. That is actually a florist pin, and that's what I use to pin those moss onto the foam with. However, you can use some florist wire. Just use your wire cutter and bend the wire and then just sort of pin that foam on there so that it won't be constantly falling off while you're trying to work with it. So once you get it to that point, now here's where I said cover it sparingly and that sort of thing. So once you get your pumpkin and your foam and your moss on there, then you want to start looking at your succulents. For your cuttings, you want to lay out your succulents and you want to sort of lay them out in a desirable design. You want to look for an assortment of colors and shapes to make a nice centerpiece. Now, the jade plant that you see in the upper left, those are cuttings that I took from a jade plant that I have at home, and it sits out on my deck all summer long. It just grows giant. And then when I bring it in the fall, I just cut it back really hard. So these are a few of those pieces there. And actually, you can't see it in this picture, but there were actually some blooms in some of those cuttings that I took off of that, or buds, not blooms. They were getting ready to bloom. So I will use some of those in there. And then also, I did buy some succulents to use as well. I want to use those. I think I will use those as cuttings as well. I have tried before to sort of stick some of the roots into the wet foam and let them sort of grow as well. But in this centerpiece, what I'm doing is I have my centerpiece, but essentially I'm rooting cuttings while I'm enjoying a centerpiece. So if I have plants in there that have roots on them, and I'm trying to grow these succulent plants in there with their roots in wet foam, well, they do not like all that water. So usually they do not last very well. They don't do very well because they do not need all of that wetness and all of that water. Whereas cuttings, a succulent cutting does. So if you have a plant, if you have to buy plants to make your centerpiece, I would suggest to buy a large plant or larger plants and take the cuttings off of it to grow additional plants from them. And don't use the plants with the roots attached to it, because you'll only end up with, it'll just be a mess for that one plant. They will eventually die because they're getting way too much water. But as you get your plants together, and even with these that are in our little cup here, I'll take those out, I'll take those apart, I will start making them into some cuttings. And I think here in a little bit, I will try to turn on my camera here, get everything adjusted and actually do that and show you how to make some cuttings out of them. But remember, don't be afraid to mix different colors and shapes and sizes and textures, especially textures, because it just adds so much to your arrangement. Now, another thing that you can use, you don't have to use, but it's a good thing to use, is rooting hormone. When you take a cutting, you are cutting off a piece of the plant. You'll usually just sort of pull a piece of the plant away from, the original plant, and you pull off leaves so that you get a good piece of stem there. And what you're doing where you have injured it, where you've pulled off the leaves, when you put a little bit of rooting hormone on there, that hormone actually helps a reaction take place that stimulates little rootlets to come on. Now, that reaction takes place anyway when you injure the plant. But the rooting hormone there, it is said that it, will make it come on a little faster, maybe a little heavier, that sort of thing. But even if you don't have the rooting hormone, when you injure your plant and you have a nice cut and you give it that moisture in the median, then eventually, for the most part, about 80 to 90% of the time, your cuttings will start to develop roots. But it seems that when you add this rooting hormone, it just speeds it up a little bit. But if you do plan to use the rooting hormone, I suggest that you sprinkle a little bit out on your work surface and dip your plant end into the powder. Do not dip it into the package itself, because when you do that, you can contaminate the whole bottle of rooting hormone. Because, if that little plant has some type of fungus or something like that, you are transferring it into that rooting hormone. And then the next time you use it for some other type of cutting or whatever, and if you do the same thing, then you just transferred that fungus that one plant had to a whole new set of cuttings that you have taken. So make sure that you pour it out, if not out on the surface here, into a little paper plate, a cup, just something, some little container where you're not dipping it into the actual little jar of it. Okay, now this is a little video I tried to take, and that's why I decided I think I'll just try to cut back to myself and try to show you. But this shows my little bypass cutters. I can't even remember where I got these, or I would tell you. They're very sharp. I try to keep them very sharp. I always clean them with a little sanitizing hand, the handy wipes or whatever between each cut. But as you can see, I made a nice slanting. I like to make a slanting cut on that jade plant there on the end, right at a little node where one of those leaves came out. I dipped it into the rooting hormone, and then I pulled back a little bit of that moss, because remember I said I had it in there pretty heavy, and then I stuck it into the rooting hormone, leaving the leaves up above the moss. You just want the stem and that where it was in the rooting hormone to go into the moss, into that moist moss. You can also use a clean razor blade, but when you make your cuts, you want to make a nice, clean, sharp test when you start to make your cuts for your propagation. Let's see what it says here. Yeah, I think I've covered that there. Okay, so you tuck pieces in as you go, making the top of the pumpkin full and vibrant. But you also want to make sure that you rotate your pumpkin or gourd so you ensure that all sides are equally decorative and attractive. Let's see, now we're on to care. So I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to stop my share. If you all will bear with me. I think I can do this. There we go. Now here is the pumpkin. And please tell me, Jessica, if you will, if you'll make sure you tell me if you can't see things or things aren't going well.
You're getting
Pull
there.
that into. Okay, here is the pumpkin. As you can see, got quite a few plants in there. The only thing that I don't particularly I don't like about this one is that a lot of my cuttings were short to begin with, and my plants were short, except for the jade plant. I could have made them longer, but so everything is really close in. So if you do this, you might want to consider buying larger plants and taking cuttings from there where they can be larger. But see, some of the plants that I had that I actually cut plants were this size. So they didn't have much stem once it was ready to stick out. Okay. So, but we're going to try this. If you'll bear with me. Now, this is a plant actually that I had, but I'm going to take little bypass cutters here and I'm going to cut. I don't know if you can see that. So I've snipped him off of there. And before class, I actually cleaned my bypass cutters and make sure everything was nice and clean. Let me see. Can you all, I guess you all can see that.
Yeah, we can
I'm
see
looking
Sharon.
at
Thanks.
here. Okay, so this would be a nice little cutting, but I'm going to take and peel these off. Now, actually, these little, you wouldn't want to use these for your living centerpiece, but you could actually take these tiny little leaves here, dip them in the rooting hormone, and then put them in a nice little clay pot with some potting soil. Keep the potting soil moist. And once you dip the end of this into the rooting hormone, put those into the clay pot, into that moist soil. All of these, and see, I'm going to pick off several of them because I want to get a nice stem there going. And as you can see right here, it almost looks like, see, it started its own little plantlet right there. I'm going to try to pull that off without, so that we can actually get another little plantlet going. So you could actually go ahead and start these in a little clay pot. Keep them moist, maybe put a little saran wrap over them in a bright window. Make sure you keep them moist, and then after, over time, then they will eventually start to root. But here's our cutting that we're going to use for our living centerpiece. Now I'm going to take these just because I'm not going to use my razor blade because I like these really well. And I'm going to cut this. There's all these little nodes where I have taken the leaves off. I'm going to find a node, and right at that node there at the bottom, I'm going to cut it on a slant. And remember, I like to cut it on a nice little slant because we want to get a nice, as much surface area there as we can to be able to get a good area to get this rooting hormone on there. Now I have actually put some powder on my desk. Yeah, I know you can't. Dipped that end. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, there you go. Dipped that in. You can see I placed some rooting hormone on there. Now, so what I will do, you would look around for a nice place where this is needed. I'm just going to look for a good spot where you all would be able to see it on this little pumpkin. Right in here. Working back that moss. And that's why I told you to use the moss sparingly at first, and you can always go back. Now, because that's got a nice slanted edge and we've got the foam there and the wet foam, I just sort of push that in there and it just stays right there. And so you just continue to do that. Let's see, let's take one of these. We'll do the same. I'm actually going to take like the top out of it and pull right there some of those. Actually, that has a nice little edge on it there where I cut it from the plant. And
Sharon, if you can scoot your pumpkin a little more into.
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
That's
I sort of moved it out of the way, didn't I? I'm sorry. But as I said, my plants are maybe a little short. It'd be nice to have taller plants. Let me try this with a taller, nice tall one. So again, just pull that out. I'm going to try not to cut much off of it. Dip it. So you can see the rooting hormone on there. And then let's see, I'm going to make sure, looks like we could use something right in there. Now mine is for teaching purposes, so try not to judge. You all can use it, do the artistic thing, but I'm just trying to make sure you can see what, how things can go, but see how that can go. And you can see too, that if you have like this little guy here, if you have some of the succulents that are a little more vining, we have some of those, something that's a little bigger, a little taller. Also, you can see that the very smoothness of the jade plant up against this tiny little textured thing here. What is that little guy? I've got his thing here. Anyway, it just makes a really, really nice looking. And mine, I have to admit, mine looks a little pitiful looking at it in person, just because, just because. So there, I hope that helps you to see, how to cut those cuttings and how to place them in there. I would suggest having your cuttings setting out. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick so you're not looking at. There we go. Here we go. Yeah, so, get everything ready and have all your cuttings, have a plan going there and have them ready to go. But also, don't worry about it. Just keep on cutting, keep on putting things into it. Because what I usually find, if you as you go along, if you think, oh my goodness, this looks terrible, but the more you continue, the better it gets. And Jessica, what are you looking at here?
Yeah, I was going to say I can see your screen, but you're not in presentation mode.
I think I've got the wrong share, don't
I? You might just have to go back in and select.
There we go.
The slideshow.
Okay.
Yeah, that's got it.
Now, on to care. Okay. Now, with this one, since it is a foam arrangement or a wet foam arrangement, and we're trying to start cuttings here. Remember, these are succulents and they love it dry, but we are trying to start the cuttings. We're trying to propagate these cuttings. Them moist. So I would suggest that you place your pumpkin on a tray or a decorative plate when using it as a centerpiece. I don't know if you could tell, but mine, I actually have it that I was moving around here. I have it on a cake plate. For one, I wanted to have it up a little bit so I could move it around and it was up more so that I could get it on the camera. But you could use that, in your arrangement on your Thanksgiving table or whatever. Put it on something pretty that also becomes part of your holiday decorations. Not only just to make things pretty, but also it'll help capture any dripping moisture or anything and save any kind of, like your nice table, your nice dining table or any kind of wooden surfaces that you might have it sitting on. Now, to maintain this, since this is foam, what I would suggest to you that every once in a while, feel the moss and sort of look at the plants. Tug on them just a little bit. If there's some that look like they're starting to fade a little bit, just give them a gentle little tug, see how they're doing. But take a watering can or, something, a cup, anything, but pour a little water into your foam. And what I've been doing is actually taking my finger, pushing back some of that moss and actually applying the water directly to the foam. I make a little indentation in the foam and pour the water directly into the foam. And what I've noticed, I've prepared for it, maybe water to run off of it, but it hasn't. The foam has actually soaked it all up and has managed to, after I do that when I water it like that, then the moss will come back with a nice moisture to it, and the plants actually perk up a little bit. So I can tell that it's actually, moisturizing and keeping a nice moisture there. You can mist it if you'd like to, but I worry about misting the plants and keeping them wet, because what we want to really do is to keep those root tips moist and the foam moist. So I would just water the foam if you can. This is misting will keep high humidity around your arrangement and your foam from drying out. But, and I put that in there, but this last week or two, since I've been caring for it, what I have found that works better is just actually watering it with my little watering can. So with the foam arrangement, I'm going to take that out too. And I should have this afternoon and I didn't, and I apologize. But anyway, what I have found with the foam arrangement is that you water it, just water it with a little bit of water and wait. And then with a little bit more water and wait. And then later on, just sort of feel the moss and look at the plants. And if they look like they're doing fine, then just leave it be. Now, this arrangement should last for at least a month before it really maybe starts to look a little bedraggled, or the pumpkin starts to look a little bedraggled. But by that time, it is Christmas, so by that time, you're done with this and you're ready for something new. Now, I have always been one who planted something, excuse me, or planted seeds. And if they didn't hurry up and come up, then I wanted to dig them up and see what was going on. So I had one of the little succulents, I'd put it in there, had some rooting powder on it. And I was really curious as to whether or not it was actually sending out some little roots. And so I actually had felt a little in my daily routine of coming and sort of pulling on them, or, checking on them and everything. And this one actually fell out. But when it did, what I did see was there were some little roots starting to come out. So it will start to develop roots. And I was glad to see that. So I just wanted to put that there as an encouragement that, yes, they will start to develop roots. But once you have the need for your holiday centerpieces over, you want to put your pumpkin centerpiece in. You don't want to put it into direct sunlight, because remember, we're trying to get these little succulents to root, and we don't want it to dry out too quickly. Now, surely by a month, though, our roots will begin to grow, and they should be growing into the maybe into the moss, but also into the foam. And then eventually the idea is that they will grow into the pumpkin or the gourd itself as the pumpkin starts to soften. So check on them from time to time and wait, and continue to lightly water the foam. If any of the plants die or dry out and can be removed, just pick them out. But if they show any sign of life, just leave them alone, because they still have a chance of rooting. But once your pumpkin or gourd starts to really deteriorate, you want to carefully slice off the top of the pumpkin. And I know, to some of you, this might sound a little gross, but I actually, have done this with the ones that I made back in 2015 with that class. And it wasn't that bad. I just sort of took a knife and, like you would with a watermelon or something, and cut that top off, and had a pot ready that was about the size that I thought would be once I cut that top off, and placed them inside that pot that had soil in it, and just kept them in there until it was time, when I could set them outside after the danger of frost once spring got here. Now, if you have cold hardy succulents, once after the danger of frost, then you can pick a place outside and actually plant them out into the soil. But if you don't have the cold hardy, then I would just suggest that you leave them in a large planter somewhere, and with potting soil and that sort of thing, and enjoy. Now, one little thing that I mentioned earlier, but the tiny little pumpkins can make great place card settings and great gifts for your guests to take home. Those tiny little ones, I mean, you can just take a few little cuttings, maybe from 3 different little plants, and very easy to put together, and they are cute as cute can be. So, and sometimes you can make quite a few that way. Now, when I talked about 2015, when I did it then, it was a hot glue gun method. And as you see here on the screen, I have alternative method, hot glue gun, and I have hot coals behind it. Because for me, mixing me and a hot glue gun is just a recipe for disaster. Especially in a class, you've got all of those, everybody's trying to get into, hooked up to electricity. Everybody's trying to glue, and just hot glue's going everywhere. And it's just a mess, I think. It makes me nervous. I always end up burning myself. I don't know how many times. You get glue stuck everywhere. You've got all those little strings going everywhere. So it just was never my favorite thing. And that's probably why it took me from, after 2015, I really didn't do this very much after that. But if you think this wet foam and propagating them that way sounds a little bit complicated, you can try the alternative method of the hot glue gun. But there are just a few little differences, and I'll just go over them really quickly with you right now. So if you're going to use those cuttings from existing plants, you need to go ahead and take those cuttings at least 24 hours in advance, because you want the tip in there, the cut, to dry. You don't want a fresh cut. You want it to be dry and hardened off. Also, if you're using small plants or plugs, do not water them the day before creating your centerpiece. You want everything dry, because if you've got anything wet, then your glue will not take. And then that's a mess in itself. Also, you want to make sure well-ventilated area, because this method does call for using dry sheet moss, where we soak ours in water to cover the foam. In this, you take a piece of dry sheet moss and spray it with spray adhesive, which is another nightmare for me. It was for the class. And then you put it on the top of the pumpkin. And so you want it to be well ventilated in there, because that does give off a certain smells that can be toxic and harmful to you if you're in a closed up area. Also, remember to aid and clean up, cover your workspace with newspaper or brown craft paper and that sort of thing. And then again, I caution you, remember, hot glue guns can be extremely hot and cause burns. Now, as the difference here for cuttings, Have your glue gun warming while you begin with the moss. You spray your moss with the spray adhesive. Quickly place it on the top of the pumpkin, pressing down firmly. And make sure you hold it there until the moss sticks. Now, you might want to have like plastic gloves or something on, because this is where your hands can sometimes stick to the pumpkin and the moss. So it's nice if you have on plastic gloves that you can take off once this is over and peel off of everything, and then go on to the next thing maybe, and also have another set of plastic gloves waiting for you. Lay out your succulent cuttings, and then with the glue gun, apply glue to the stems and the bases of the cuttings and quickly press them into the moss. Now, this can be a little tricky sometimes, or it was for me, because you're applying the glue there, but then you're also applying that to the moss, and it can be small, and sometimes your fingers will get into that hot glue. So what we had is we got some I got some like eyebrow pluckers and things like that, tweezers that we would sort of use and try to pick them up with, so that you wouldn't be getting the glue all over your fingers and then pressing it in there. So you have to sort of work out a system with that. With small plants or plugs, you want to remove the dry plants from the pot and get rid of any potting soil. If the roots are torn off, don't worry. With the glue gun, make sure you apply it to the bases or the stems, keeping clear of any remaining roots, and quickly press them into the moss. Taking care that you don't burn yourself. Now, the care for these are you wait 24 hours before you mist, because you want the glue to dry properly, and then you maintain it by misting it daily. And then again, it's just about the same. It should last a month. With proper care, making sure that you mist it. The only thing I noticed about with the misting is that sometimes when you're misting the plant tissue on top and not so much below there where the root tissue is. And sometimes the plant tissue can get a little bit mushy. So you want to make sure that you pull that off. But I was able to actually root some of the plants and actually able to, have succulents that rooted and actually put them into a pot. But the glue gun process was not my favorite, just for so many reasons. They were very attractive. They were pretty, but you did have to do your homework afterwards by, picking all the little strands and that sort of thing off. So, but the glue gun thing was not my favorite. And I think that's the end. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Sharon. We've not had any questions posted in the chat box. So if anyone does have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask that for Sharon.
I'm trying to stop share right now, but there it is.
There we go. All right. Well, if we don't have any questions, Sharon, thank you again. Good information and good to see what that centerpiece is all about. So we appreciate it.
Yeah. As you can tell, the hot glue gun was not my favorite.
You're not a fan.
It's sort of like saran wrap. I'm saran wrap impaired, and hot glue guns and I do not get along.
Right. I agree with you on the saran wrap for sure. Well, thank you again. And if you don't have any other questions, I guess that will be it for tonight. I do want to remind you that next Monday at 6:30, we will be talking about caring for holiday plants. I will be the
Right.
one that is teaching that, and Sharon will be moderating for me. And then on our very last session for the webinar series will be on November 22nd, 2 Mondays from now at 6:30, and that is going to be 4-season interest landscaping. So making some choices for your landscaping to have some color and texture interest for all 4 seasons. So, and that'll be with Alexis Sheffield from Boyle County. So, but thank you again for those of you that joined us tonight. We appreciate it. And
Thank you, Jessica, for moderating.
of course, yeah, thank you, Sharon, for a great lesson. So if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and end for tonight.
Right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.